Hey everyone, want to do a quick Star Wars CCG video today. If you're one of my Magic followers or fans and you're not familiar with Star Wars CCG, I'm going to put some links in the description that'll help you get up to speed. Can't recommend the game enough. It's free to play. It's community run. It's sort of abandonware in that sense, and that gives you a real amazing opportunity to learn for free, play for free, and if you do that, I think you'll find it's a very deep strategic game, and the software lets you again play for free, watch your replays for free, and you can sort of study and improve that way. And it's a really good exercise for any card game player, I think, in playing something that's a little bit closer to like a chess type of experience in terms of games are really complicated, and this is true of many games, but Star Wars CCG in particular. You're never going to play a perfect game. There's always going to be room to improve, and there are things to spot even on the board. Oh, I missed that, or this move would have been a little bit better. And I've found it to be a really fun set of puzzles and challenges. So if you're new to it, check out the links in the description. Maybe start there. For the folks who aren't new to it, I'm going to go over some of the decks I've been working on recently. You know, as a player myself, I'm probably like a 5 out of 10 as a player. As a deck builder, I like to think I'm more like a 7 out of 10. And as a sort of a deck designer trying to create some innovative strategies, you know, I think I've been learning and doing pretty well. Not every idea works. Not every idea I show you today is going to be tier 1 right out of the gate, but I'll show you some of the things, and I'll talk about whether, how strong I think the decks are, but some things I've been working on that I think are a little bit different than what you see, and are also somewhat aimed at the metagame, especially this one right here. So I'll start with my light side deck I've been working on. It's called TRM Menace Fades, and it's not going to be shocking to you in a moment why it's called that. But the idea is that, you know, your mains deck playing no space has to decide where it's going to decide to play onto the ground, which locations, which sites. And by selecting the nightclub, and this is the alternate art version of nightclub if you can't see what this is, I'll go essentially not card by card, but I'll dive into what the choices are. If you can't see something, you don't have to squint at the screen. I might bring it up later. The nightclub, the Coruscant docking bay, and the Jedi Council Chamber, one of your non-battleground locations, you can actually satisfy Menace Fades, the clause that says if you control 3 Coruscant locations. And with the idea being that you can race a space deck, and BB-8 and Rose will help with that as well, but you can also, you're more likely to be able to ignore what your opponent's doing. Let's say you're playing as Map, and they've got something at the Jakku system, and they got something at the Jakku site, or the Starkiller base site, whatever they have. You're more likely to be able to ignore that if you can cancel Force Drain bonuses. Now, the opponent may not be relying on Force Drain bonuses, or they may be coming to you, or you may be going to them because you are a mains deck. So if they're, you might decide, hey, I'm gonna go to Starkiller base myself. There's no requirement that Menace Fades become part of your plan, but it's there, especially for those matchups where you're just in a pure race, and your opponent's saying, for example, I'm in particular set your course for Alderaan space deck, and I'm gonna concede the ground essentially and just try to race you in space. Well, they're gonna have a very hard time doing that. And in fact, I created this deck when that set your course for Alderaan flip deck that just came out with set 17. When that became popular, is when I created this deck. I played against that matchup a couple of times. You actually are favored in the matchup, which is nice. That it actually works. It does what it's supposed to do. And in other matchups, you're mostly just a mains deck. I mean, I think it does. You're doing some of the things that mains decks are supposed to, that any sort of TRM deck or communing deck is trying to do. A couple of the card choices to point out that will just help you understand a little bit of the strategy, but also like how this fits into the current metagame. So one of them is Yoda, Keeper of the Peace. Now, normally the newer Yoda is sort of all over the place. The 4 Destiny one that can move to an Episode 1 site. It gives you extra mobility. But if you're summoning that Yoda to the Coruscant Jedi Council Chamber, and you have battlegrounds on one or either side of it, you now have the ability to pull this Yoda and just simply slide him over, either to the nightclub, or to the docking bay, or to leave him there and have Yoda be occupying that 1/3 of your Menace Phase if you're on a Menace Phase strategy. But let's say you're playing as Bring Him Before Me, and the game may not be about Menace Phase, it may be about winning the key battles. You can simply slide Yoda over to the nightclub and give your opponent a pretty hard time since they're obviously their deck, it was a very popular strategy for Dark, it's sort of all about adding that extra destiny. Yoda, Keeper of the Peace becomes a really powerful card. And so I really like that interaction of just pull. And then also you slide over to the docking bay. So if you're playing, let's say, Router Ops, you may want to or need to move Yoda all the way over to Router through a spaceport docking bay. Well, the docking bay allows you to do that. So this Yoda, although it doesn't have the mobility in the text, it's mobile by virtue of how you're set up. You lose the ability when you play Jedi business in order to pull Nightclub, in order to do some of the Episode 1 Jedi stuff you're doing. You lose the ability to play the very best Lukes. I mean, those Death Star 2 icon Lukes are certainly the best. Instead, we got some Luke with lightsaber action. It's not a bad consolation prize. It's another thing that's going to help you in a sense against bringing before me. If you're planning to just give Luke over, you don't even have to pull that shield. You can give Luke over, have them lose a Force a turn because you're not relying on this Luke. The Episode 1 Jedi are really strong. I mean, this isn't new to anybody, but while I think the main deck that competes the most with this right now, the Qui-Gon communing deck, you lose access to one of my absolute favorite characters right now. I think there's few characters in the game right now able to hold a battleground on their own, even against another deck that's playing fairly dedicated ground, right? I mean, it's not a bulletproof strategy. You're not going to beat someone's entire deck with it, but if you can deploy it early and feel pretty good, and you can deploy it late once folks have spread out and be very effective. So certainly Qui-Gon, having access to this character is one of the main reasons you wouldn't necessarily want to play a communing deck that loses access to it. Now, you could play Yoda communing, so there's other decks that have access to it, but I think in this strategy, it's particularly effective. You're trying to hold a couple battlegrounds. Oftentimes Qui-Gon on his own can hold, and then even though the Jedi lightsaber, thanks to this count saber, doesn't add to Force drain, neither does this lightsaber. You have Qui-Gon sitting at the Nightclub. Let's say that's what your strategy is, draining for 2. You may have another Jedi or 2 over here, draining for 2 or 3, and you're setting up enough to do damage. And you can also, again, BB-8 and rows stack with the rest of what you're doing to potentially have a pretty good amount of damage. And then you might be taking a drain for 3 in space or something, and you'll be fine. So, the weapons are set up to give you flexibility to not... So the Jedi lightsaber, again, I'm playing it even though it doesn't add a Force drain bonus because it's so important to have that flexibility. Have a second lightsaber that can go on Mace, a second lightsaber that can go on Qui-Gon. And in fact, if I had to play either 0 or 2 Jedi lightsaber, I'd probably play 2, but I'm playing 1, which I think feels like the right number. You lose with this kind of setup with Jedi business instead of the blaster rack, the light side version, I forget what it's called. You lose the ability to Leia's gun. So you give something up there, but you maintain flexibility with Anakin's lightsaber to head over to Rey, Anakin, etc. I guess not, etc. End of list. You have to play the Episode 1. You can't play the one that goes on Leia because it's not an Episode 1 saber. The nice thing, you can play just one Anakin and just 2 of this character, even though it's really important, because actually extra copies of Speak with the Jedi Council can actually pull those Jedi to the Council Chamber, and again, you can just slide them right over to where you need them. So that's another nice thing about this deck. There's some character pulling that works pretty well. I'm using a Rebel Leadership package for additional character pulling, so I don't have to go heavy numbers on some of these One Destiny cards. I can still have Leia show up most games. Let's say I flex start. I must be allowed to speak, which we'll talk about in a moment. I can fairly reliably find Leia, even if it gets grabbed. Okay, great. And now there may be something else they can't grab, but also, okay, there's only 2 characters. It's not a card I'm relying on, but it's there to help me find characters. The build overall it's light. I'm trying to learn as I go and use fewer character cards in my decks, even my mains decks. So in the past, I've had too many 2 copies of the same character, even sometimes 3 copies of the same character, and you just over time you realize it's really tough when those extra copies are low destiny and you can't deploy them whenever the opponent's just ignoring the one you already have on the table. So trying to diversify a bit here and play the resistance characters that will give me an opportunity to again play Rose and BB-8 and be better at racing. I don't like Sand. I think it's just sort of like a mandatory play these days with just these mains decks that you're hoping to use weapons to chop down the opponent, not necessarily destinies, and bring them before me, sitting there waiting to do nasty things. So I think this card is sort of a must play. The starting package right now, it's Jedi Business and Insurrection Aim High every game. I tried the new Episode 1 version that lets you activate a force with General Kenobi. It wasn't happening often enough to justify not having Aim High and losing access to the other starting effect, which most commonly you start another Pathetic Life Form. Your plan is to throw somebody at the Nightclub, so you might as well get force activation from that. If I'm playing against a Tatooine deck like CCT or Scum, I'll certainly flex start this instead of another Pathetic Life Form for obvious reasons. I think that's worth doing. It's just so good if you have it, and you really miss it if you don't have it. You can flex start Menace Fades against folks that are just set up to, you're going to be needing it, and you're going to be racing, so that would be set your course for Alderaan primarily. It could show up if someone else has a setup that looks like they're, I don't know, Mustafar combat readiness or whatever, where it looks like they're probably a space deck. They've thrown their Kuat drive yards out. It's possible you want to put Menace Fades out instead of like another Pathetic Life Form, but that's typically only if your opponent's giving you an indication that that's what they're planning on doing. There is an issue that sometimes, when you're not starting it, you don't always find the Menace Fades. But again, Menace Fades is really, in this format, I find it to be very sort of binary, where it's really, really critical to let you beat some of those space decks that are trying to get over on mains by not deploying to the ground, and you can start it. And the other matchups is just not that important because you're mostly just trying to win those battles on the ground and take over the game that way. Although it might show up later and be okay if for some reason you're ignoring your opponent at that time. A lot of decks, they're not relying on force drain bonuses. What other card choices I want to talk about? I think, I'd love to play 2 Blast Reflection and 2 Jedi's Resilience, and there's always you just can't fit everything, and that you're going to find that whenever you build any of these light side or dark side mains decks, you can't fit all this stuff you want. I wish I had another Disarmed Canceller. I wish I had another Ellis Canceller. Can I put a Sense in my deck? Can I put a second? These are all cards that people commonly play in this type of deck. I just don't have room for it, and I want to play Under Attack because the weapon strategy is naturally weak against ATSTs and AT-ATs, even though the new Blizzard 1's immune, the other walkers aren't, so I want to have this card in my deck. It's High Destiny. I'm planning on having 3PO, 3PO Puller. I can always throw it back, whereas a card like Sense or Second Blaster Proficiency, they can be very strong. There's no question about it. It's just very hard to, float those low destinies around, and then you draw them, you sort of have to keep them because they're low destinies, so trying to skew away from that and have a little bit higher destiny, but it's always unclear to me. It's also, just with the bullets, you never know what exactly you're trying to cancel this week versus next week, right? So it may be the case that there have been certainly times where I felt like I want to play Swing and a Miss or Strike Blocked and really have that kind of action. And again, Second Blast or Deflection, certainly. So cards that are all in play, but that didn't quite make the cut this time. All right, so that's TRM Menace Fades. It's a fun deck. I think you'll find that it's a powerful deck. I think it's like the best of the decks I'm going to talk about today. The most ready. The other ones are a little bit sort of still in the oven, still have some baking left to go. So I'm going to talk about 2 other dark side decks, and then I'll get out of here. You can see I've got a bunch of decks. The first one I want to talk about is working a little bit on this invasion. These next 2 decks are sort of decks that are trying to take advantage of floating really high destinies. This one, I'll talk about how I came up with some of the ideas, but then also where I fell short and where my teammates are going to try to help me sort of figure out what I want to do here. So basically the concept here, obviously they gave you some new cards and that help your activation for this archetype. So you're just playing the invasion setup. The idea here is to start inconsequential losses, use both starship weapons and character weapons to help you have forfeit fodder going in between the droid racks that your objective lets you start and some battle droids. And these, you can often have just extra forfeit that makes you pretty hard to battle against. Cards like, O Switch Off can help disaster from happening if everyone has Leia with gun or something. So, there are, I don't think that, there's not like a bunch of new concepts here, but I'm trying to do a few things and maybe too many things. That was the feedback I got from my teammates because I've had some okay results with this deck. It's sort of win one, lose one, and I tend to win against the, less experienced opponent and lose to a better opponent. So this is not quite ready yet. And my teammates said, I really should probably think about playing more focus on mains or more focus on droids and rifles, but trying to split the difference and play space, probably stretched a little too thin. And that rings pretty true to me. I worry with this deck that I'm not able to hold the throne room against dedicated ground, and I'm not able to hold space against dedicated space. So you're sort of in this middle ground, worst of both worlds. That's at least that's the danger that you're in, potentially, right? Now, ideally, you shoot someone out of space. You have really high destinies going with this, and you can maybe get someone out of space while you're forfeiting this thing with a rifle in space. And there are ways to have at least game against everybody, but it doesn't always come together that way. So this is a deck that I found to be sort of a step or two away. Should you be playing Imperial Artillery? or should you have the You'll Be Dead and sort of, well, I like this. I'm trying to play a really high Destiny strategy. After a lot of the characters can pull, I mean, this Phantom Menace pulls a bunch of the Nemoidians, this Sidious will pull your extra gun ray. Get that low Destiny stuff out of the deck. Get ready to go. You've got your 4-LOM to start throwing some of this stuff back. They get forfeited to use. And the idea is, look, you can really start clearing people out. You do a lot of damage on the ground. You can easily set up to be draining for 6 or 7. Even through resistance, you can drain for 6 here. If they try to ignore you, it's pretty dangerous. So the risk is less about being ignored and more about just losing the ground or losing space. I played a couple of games where I really aggressively flipped. I mean, you can do like some turn 1 stuff where you go like play a Nemoidian down here, flip your objective. Now battle droids deploy -1, pay 3 for this, put this on it. And then all of a sudden I lose my ability to pull this other site. Another problem with the deck is just the activation and activation ratio. Once you're flipped, the ratio is really bad. Even before you flip, it's not great. If you lose the system, your activation goes down. And I'm choosing not to play the bridge, and we must accelerate, but I really might have to revisit that. I'm not sure I can afford to do that because it's just your activation ratio is pretty poor. So still some work to be done on this, but I wanted to show you something sort of from the drafts, so to speak. Then another one I built this one very recently. They're trying to do what I've called Sith space. Again, I'm trying to load up on a high destiny weapon. In this case, I'm starting best troops and going for the 9 Destiny R's Sings Blast Rifle, 8 copies. Really saying, okay, what's the lowest I can go in terms of blue cards and black cards, characters and vehicles and ships, and still be able to be really menacing. And I think obviously I Am Your Father with Vader's anger and with this throwable saber, and all of a sudden you're adding 9s to attrition. Well, is it only for weapon or battle destiny? Yeah, so you're adding 7 to attrition. You might be drawing a 9 for battle destiny. You can try to do some nasty things on the ground. Blizzard 8 and Veers are pullable, and so the core of the deck is really Death Squadron assignments to pull ships. Imperial Command pulls 2 characters and a vehicle. I'm sorry, Death Squadron assignment pulls all the ships and a vehicle. The Imperial Command will pull both your character, sort of a vehicle, your Veers that goes with your vehicle, your 2 admirals that help you, either put more pressure on space or, do great in space by drawing potentially again, 9, 18, 14, 13, whatever. So you got a lot of ways to be pretty menacing with only a card or 2 deployed. Kuat Drive Yard is going to give you that destiny no matter what with your Star Destroyers, which makes you really annoying. If you spread out and they drop on you and you're guaranteed to draw destiny, let's say you draw even a 4, I mean, you're forfeiting, you might be okay, then you drop a new one down, maybe you throw an admiral on it, and now you're drawing some pretty nasty destiny. So again, just like the last deck, I mean, you use up a bunch of deck space on this stuff. It's not like you're guaranteed to be able to hold anything. You could lose in space, you could certainly lose on the ground. But the idea here is to sort of race in space, and you don't have to deploy this until late in the game, and you can hold it, and then your opponent sort of spreads and make sure that you can't drop your Vader on them. Maybe you have Vader even sitting here. And you can shuttle Vader up if you decide I'm just going to race, add an icon, and now I'm draining. Or you can now drop this. Let's say you want to put Sidious there or whatever character there, maybe Tarkin, and then I'm going to move Vader over. So that's a really interesting sort of way. I think you want to, for the most part, deploy to space first. I've lost a game or 2 here where I just was too ambitious in trying to get both space and ground really fast, and then of course I got my butt kicked on the ground. So maybe just hold this, and then later on you have Blizzard 8 Veers when they've already spread. You have Vader, and then you move Vader over from here. I mean, that's pretty nasty. I added a neighboring canceller, and which also has some other nice tack-on effects in order to try to be better at you can't really play Sense with 8 7s in your deck, so you have to have something to cancel neighbor. Anyways, right now I've only got 1 of this Git combo. You're sort of relying on, you have 2, there's a double back package, which I really like. Dengar helps you a lot in space. 4-LOM is absolutely critical with this many 9s in your deck. And then you get Boba Fett, which plays nicely with your sort of Vader stands alone type of strategy. So I think this double back thing is really cool. It's more sort of pulling. So you end up with a deck ideally that has like 6 or 7 of these, a couple of these, and you're just going, and obviously you have a lot of these 4s. So you're drawing mostly 4s and 7s and 9s, 4s and 9s. And you can also, have some easy tracking with 4-LOM. So that's what this deck's trying to do. Again, I wish I had room for more stuff. You can always shave a blast rifle or 2, but the more of those you shave, the harder it is to justify playing this. So at some point, you know, at some point, if you say, like, you know what, I'm not willing to start this, okay, you probably want to make these the Kylo effect. It has 7 Destiny. Add a Kylo or 2 to your deck with Lightsaber and do that thing. I think that's fine. You know, you could change your thing to Maul. I think that's a different strategy, though. But, you know, and that's its own. When you use Phantom Menace, but that's not what this deck is trying to do. You're not allowed to play Maul when you only have the Vader version. So anyways, I found there's some cool things going on. I think like having this, where you can start this and start the castle, or you can start Kashyyyk. It doesn't really matter. You're gonna pull the other one with drive yards, and then like I said, this is gonna pull Vader, and then you can decide: do I want to shift Vader over? Do I want to shuttle up and start draining for more, and then maybe later on in the game preserve the ability to, okay, let me drop down. There's a trick you can do where you can use the vehicle to shuttle and move in certain spots. You know, there's some things you can do to sort of set up a space race, but then eventually be able to. The goal is to occupy, you know, a battleground on the ground, a battleground on the ground. That's a mouthful. Anyway, so this is a new one, the least tested of the different ideas, but I think it's got some potential, and again, it's pretty different from the other decks I've seen out there. So, hope you enjoyed the video today. Happy to chat with folks on the Star Wars CCG Slack or in the comments here. But again, check out those. If you've made it all the way through this video and you're new to Star Wars, you're probably bored by now. But please look at those videos, get a sense of what's going on, then come back to the video. And again, maybe I should have said that at the beginning. But thanks, everyone.